Thank you for joining us at the 10th Annual Seattle Asian American Film Festival. My name is SuYoung Yun. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm your moderator for the free Chol Soo Lee Q&A that you're tuning in for today. So I wanted to personally say how impactful it was to watch this film as a Korean American. I was shocked. I had never heard of the story before. And it was very affecting to see someone who looks like me go through the criminal justice system like that. So to start us off, can our directors please introduce yourselves, speak a little bit about your personal background and its connection to the film?
Sure. I guess I'll start. I'm Julie Ha. I'm one of the directors of the film, and I actually come from a journalism background. So I've been a print journalist for more than 20 years, and this is my first documentary film. And if not for my friend Eugene, I don't know if I've ever would have made a documentary film, honestly. I've known about this case, the Chol Soo Lee case, for quite a long time, since I was 18 years old, so more than 30 years. I found out about the case through my journalism mentor, K.W. Lee, who's one of the main characters in the film. He's the journalist whose series of stories helped trigger the movement to free Chol Soo Lee. And so that's when I first learned about it, but it really wasn't until I attended the funeral of Chol Soo Lee in 2014 when the idea to make a film out of this was really planted, although I didn't realize it at the time. And when I attended that funeral, I just remember feeling this overwhelming sense of heaviness in that space. And many of the people in attendance were the activists who had come to Chol Soo Lee's aid decades earlier, as well as K.W. Lee, my mentor. And I felt like they were not only grieving the loss of somebody they cared about, but it was beyond grief. They were expressing so much regret for not having done enough to save this man, even though they devoted like 6 years of their lives to freeing him from prison. And some of them had even tried to help him in his struggles after his release. So that depth of compassion and humanity really touched me. And at the same time, like there just felt like there was something though unresolved. My journalism mentor, KW, at the funeral, I remember him actually saying, why is this story still underground after all these years? This was a landmark Asian American social justice movement. Like, why isn't it well known? The story was almost like buried in history. And just the injustice of that that strong feeling, like it just stayed with me for almost a year later. Like Eugene and I then were talking one day about making a film together, because Eugene is not only a journalist, but he's worked as a film and video editor. And we were brainstorming ideas, and I mentioned like the funeral and the heaviness, and this story really needed to be told. And so we just decided like we absolutely had to make a film about this, while the firsthand sources who live this history like are still alive to be able to tell it. Eugene and I also like just share a passion for telling Asian American stories that are complex in a nuanced way. And so we just knew we had to dig in, and it literally felt like the story was beckoning us to tell it, and that it needed a release.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Eugene?
Yeah, and so, once we started approaching the actual making of the film, we had on some level a question that we could start with: why was this movement unknown? So we started asking, working with KW, and he introduced us to key figures from the movement itself. And what was really incredible was that we would meet all of the people who were activists or filmmakers or journalists at the time who were involved with the case in one way or the other. And they all had kept a box of memorabilia, of media, of pamphlets and old movement materials with them all these years. This moment had just been so important and so seminal to them that they couldn't just throw it away. They knew they had to preserve it. And it's from that material that we saw that we would be able to have enough material to be able to make a film properly. And it just, it really drove home the importance of archive, I think, especially for communities that may not be part of the mainstream, for people who look like us in particular. Because, what is an archive? Like, it's something that someone decides to preserve for future generations. And so who's doing that preserving? All of these questions sort of come into play. And in these cases, it wasn't an institution that was making these archives. It was these individuals who all had this personal connection to this moment in their lives and in history because of their involvement. And it was almost this underground archive that we feel like we uncovered. And if they had not preserved that, none of this would have been able to even be there to be sort of unburied and put together into a film. It's really just thanks to all of their work that we even have anything to present today.
Oh, amazing. It seems like when I speak about, not hearing about the story, it's all these confluence of energies, including you guys, to come together and make this heard. And so I feel lots of gratitude that folks felt called and actually did something about that. I wanted to speak on two pieces in terms of like the content of the film that I had noticed come up for me, and I would love to hear the director's thoughts. So the first question is, I'm going to start with a gatha, which is like a poem. It's called No Mud, No Lotus. And it's a popular saying by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. And the gatha speaks on the human's capacity to achieve self-realization through suffering. The symbol of a lotus arising out of mud came up for me multiple times throughout the film. There was also a connection to Buddhism near the end. Could you speak on your intention to include those images?
Sure, and thank you for that question. It's really, we haven't gotten that question before, and it's really gratifying that you sort of felt that nuance and to be able to talk about the film in this way, because I think it touches on some themes that are really important. Chol Soo did attend Buddhist churches sort of once he was out. And even as part of his sort of therapy after he was out, he would carve these Buddhist monks' walking sticks that he would gift to KW and to Doris as well, who is the family friend whose voice we hear towards the end of the film. And so there was a relationship to the religion there. But I also want to sort of make sure that we're able to keep it personalized for him as well, because the suffering that he went through was just so out of the ordinary. It was so extraordinary and was so much more than I think I personally could even imagine a person going through. I mean, the term Kafkaesque like came up in KW's articles. He wrote that into his articles about Chol Soo, like with good reason. It was just incredible what he had to go through. And Chol Soo talks about that towards the end of the film. And we very intentionally wanted him to ask this question when he was asked it, to sort of look at his life. And the quote that he has, he talks about how he's someone who's been through an enormous amount of pain that he never asked to be in. And so what do you do with that? How do you find meaning from that pain and that suffering? Again, which is so individual and specific and so beyond what any of us can imagine. And for him, what he found in that allowed him to sort of find something there was this gesture that had been there from the community, from the activists, from the people that he knew, a gesture that he called so pure and beautiful. And it could be something that he hoped to pass on to others as well. And, to take it back to the poem, the beautiful poem that you mentioned, that like, if that's the lotus, perhaps that's the lotus, but I also don't want to necessarily be too pat about it either, because I think he struggled with this question because he had been through so much and he still bore so much of the scars and the trauma and the pain of everything that he'd been through in his life. And so, I think for me, the last words of the film resonate, powerfully on multiple dimensions, but one dimension that comes up when you talk about this is the dimension of doubt, because he says that he hopes that people think that that it was worth it, basically. And there is something in that that's just so human to me, and so it speaks so much about like sort of the tenuousness of all of our existences and all of our journeys as we search for meaning, that for Chol Soo to sort of have been able to retain that despite everything that he had gone through, that just stays with me and continues to stay with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, the lingering feeling after the movie of really being touched by just the humanitarianism of the whole film really, I think is really powerful. Julie, do you have any remarks on that?
I know, I think Eugene said it beautifully.
Great. The next question I have, throughout the film, I drew many parallels between the impact of US imperialism and colonialism on the Korean Peninsula and the impact of the US police state on immigrants and people of color, including Asian Americans. It made me feel both great outrage at the US military police industrial complex and deep compassion to see the many uncontrollable external circumstances that shaped Chol Soo's life. What do you as directors hope audiences take away from your film?
Yeah, I think, there is actually so much we feel like our film can teach people. And Eugene and I have talked about it a lot, but we never wanted to be prescriptive with it. And so we hope people personalize the film though. And so what you've been saying about how it's stayed with you and you're still thinking about it long after you've seen it. We've heard that a lot from people who have seen it. And that's what that's very heartening, because we want people to personalize the story of this stranger, this man who endured more pain and suffering than a human should have to endure in a single lifetime. And that was the product of not only, racism in our country and this wrongful incarceration, but also just, painful scars from his personal life that date back to his very birth. So I think if this story of this stranger who maybe you have knows your background is completely different, and yet you are touched by this story of this man, and who may have endured so much pain and suffering in his life, but also then was touched by some of the most compassionate human beings on the planet, right? Who swooped him up and said, "We're going to get you out of prison. The rest of society has maybe deemed you worthless and disposable, but we're going to say, no, you are worth a landmark movement to overturn 2 murder convictions and stand up against one of the most powerful systems in our country, the criminal justice system." And they asserted that principle, and so he is both I guess just that contrast, enduring that much suffering in his life, but then also being a person who was embraced with that much compassion and humanity. And if we could sort of personalize that story and allow it to move us, maybe it'll allow us to change the way we see the world, because maybe we never thought about even criminal justice issues, racial profiling, mass incarceration, re-entry being issues for Asian Americans. But then we're starting to think differently because we see that this is part of our history now, and that there could be a movement of resistance, where immigrant Koreans, actually unite with 3rd generation Asian American radicals, which is, that's mind blowing in and of itself, right? But it's just if we could just think about that and be inspired by it, moved by it, and then allow it to maybe change us, or maybe it changes the way we vote. It changes the way the issues that we embrace. Maybe it changes the way we see our roles in creating a more just society. When I learned about this case, I told you when I was 18 years old, through KW Lee, it inspired me to want to become a journalist, and it inspired me to want to become the kind of journalist who especially looks out for the voices of the voiceless, the stories that we're not hearing, and particularly Asian American stories and Korean American stories. And so I know the power of this story, and that's why I went on this journey with Eugene for 6 years, even though I never really even had an aspiration to make a documentary film before, but I knew the power of this story. And I knew that it could change the way we see ourselves and our roles in creating a more just society. And so if if people do that and they personalize it, and it does change them, then I can't help but think about like just even Chol Soo Lee and how happy he would be that there is some kind of meaningful and lasting legacy, to this movement, which I think he actually would have wanted.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you. Eugene, would you want to speak on that a little bit or go to the next one?
No, I mean, I think Julie said it really beautifully.
Yeah, there's so many pieces of the film that I think can resonate with so many different people and so many different communities. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see how else it can impact different folks. And I know I'm already telling all my friends and communities to watch this movie. So the next question I wanted to ask is about just looking back now, what was the most memorable part of making the film? Is there anything you wish you had done differently or had happened differently during its production?
One of the most memorable, I mean, what I'll really treasure, I think, of the process of having made the film is really getting to know this community of elders who were involved with the movement and being able to be so embraced by them and just get to know them, in this way. And I think just, speaking for myself, I feel like as a child of immigrants, I often find that connecting with elders, when one is trying to connect with elders within sort of my family or my community, that there's a cultural barrier, there's a language barrier, there's sort of like barriers to surmount that sometimes make that cross-generational transfer of knowledge and wisdom a little bit more difficult sometimes. Not that they're not insurmountable, but it's a little bit harder. And so to be able to sort of connect with this community is just such a treasure, because I think part of what it means to be able to connect with them is to be able to connect to an Asian American history that, like, I, again, as a child of immigrants, didn't in my own family have a connection to necessarily. And so, I mean, I think we're all familiar with ideas like the perpetual foreigner myth and things like that. And I think part of how, at least I know I've internalized some aspects of that, is because there isn't always this sense of generational transfer and generational connection that I wish there were, and I didn't even, I think, understand how hungry I was for that until, again, some of the people we met through this film, like just took us into their homes and shared their stories with us and just inspired me in so many ways, because this, because what they had done, not just for Chol Soo, but through the course of the rest of their lives, and how that aligned with so many of the ethics and the morals and the guiding stars that I hope to sort of live by. Like, it was just something that I treasured about this whole process and really just will stay with me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Julie?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to affirm everything Eugene said. I think it's really, we both feel like it's probably one of the greatest honors of our lives to have met these activists and have them open their hearts to us and just tell us their stories. For me personally, like, as I mentioned, KW Lee is my mentor, and he actually has talked about many of these activists, like, for the last 30 years, and would talk about them in like sort of like just these heroic terms. And so I think to meet your heroes is like sort of a very profound experience. And the only other thing I would add is that I think another memorable part of making this film was meeting Sebastian Yoon, who does the voiceover in our film. And he is the voice of Chol Soo Lee for the first 2/3 of our film. And he also collaborated with us closely in developing the script for what Chol Soo Lee would be saying in our film. Sebastian, he's actually the discovery of our producer, Soo Kim, who heard him speak. He's not an actor, he's not a professional actor, but she heard him speak at an event for the documentary series College Behind Bars, which followed incarcerated men and women as they attended something called the Barred Prison Initiative, which allows incarcerated men and women to take college classes and earn their degrees. And so he was a participant in that program. Um, yeah, she saw him speaking and was just so moved by his honesty and his openness. And she also just felt like intuitively like he could be the voice of Chol Soo Lee. And so when we were looking for someone, you know, we watched him in Called Behind Bars, and we're just amazed by him. And so we reached out, and he responded quite immediately, and agreed to sort of meet with us, watch our film, and see if it was gonna be a good match. And I think just you know, I hope you don't mind if I share, like, I know this story is getting long, but there's just like a personal connection to Sebastian that has sort of like moved all of us on our team, that we're still amazed by. But I used to work for a Korean American magazine. I was the editor-in-chief of something called Korean Journal, and that's how Eugene and I met. He was one of our best writers. It turns out that when Sue reached out to Sebastian, he mentioned that he knew of me through the magazine, and he subscribed to the magazine while he was incarcerated. And he wrote us a letter from prison, and I happened to be the editor when he wrote the letter. And he mentioned how the magazine brought him, you know, this joy and light and a sense of community while in prison, which could be such a depressing and dark place. And then he also said, like, his wish was that our magazine could help let our community know that there are others like him. He went to prison as a teenager. He didn't, he said there are other youth like him who didn't have direction and support and guidance, and they end up making bad decisions and living very dangerous lifestyles. And you know, we're not all model minorities. And he wanted us to be able to, like, you know, to sort of spread that message within our community, you know, so we could do something about it and prevent, you know, what had happened to him. And so it's just, I couldn't believe that he was the same person who wrote that letter. And it turned out it was 10 years ago. And that then we started to collaborate on this project together, where we could not only tell Chol Soo Lee's story, but it could also, just by the very nature of our film, like, it could also sort of like help destigmatize talking about incarcerated Korean Americans and Asian Americans, because that is such a stigma still within our community. And so I don't know, there was, I mentioned that because it just felt like it was such a magical part of our film that that I'm still trying, I can't even get over the coincidences that had to happen for this to be happening. But yeah, so Sebastian is just such a special part of this filmmaking process, because he not only helped us bring out Chol Soo Lee's voice in a really important, profound way, and just the trauma and the loneliness that comes from incarceration, but he just really advocated that we do enough to make sure Chol Soo Lee's story is heard, that he's finally able to explain, you know, what happened to him and all that he had to overcome in his life. And so, yeah, that's always going to be, I think, one of the most memorable parts of working on this.
That's incredible. I think it's so amazing to hear the serendipity of the project and some of the things that came together. And it almost seems like there were like our ancestors or spirits watching over and really trying to put these powerful pieces together to help communities. It's amazing. The last question I wanted to ask is there anything you both are working on next, either individually or collaboratively, and how we as an audience can support your future work?
Yeah, I think for now we're really both focused on trying to make sure the film kind of has the greatest reach as possible, because I mean, we've just been so gratified by the reaction to the film and just what we've been afforded, and we just want to make sure that we do justice to being able to get the story out there as best as we can. And so that will certainly be some of our efforts will be applied to that in the coming months. Aside from that, I mean, I'm working on developing a few projects that are sort of in the same vein, you know, stories about people who look like us that kind of grapple with the same kinds of questions that sort of intersect with politics and existential questions as well. But yeah, I look forward to sort of sharing more about that, you know, down the line.
Wonderful. And we're excited to hear it. Julie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not positive I'll be making another documentary film. It's possible. I always felt like I had to make this particular film. I do feel like I want to go back to my first love, which is writing. And so there are a few writing projects I have in mind, but I'll never say never in terms of now that I have been exposed to this new medium of storytelling. So we'll see. Yeah. But if I could put in a plug though, just for if people could support other Asian American films, you know, and just, you know, I think it's important for our community, especially to sort of get behind documentary storytelling. Yeah, and so I hope that you know, we are like a little maybe more cognizant of like you know, when there are film festivals and when these films have theatrical releases or are on PBS, that we actually really actively show our support so that we can see more of them, you know. I think that's very important.
Absolutely. I hope this is just the tip of the iceberg. Well, thank you, Julie and Eugene, so much for joining us. And thank you to the audience for watching. Please check out the other great programs playing at SAAFF right now, available virtually from March 3rd to the 13th, and at bit.ly/SAAFF 2022. Thanks, y'all, and have a great one.